so critical, both to help people that are starting to have symptoms, cognitive issues, as early as possible, but also not too far in the future where you can test. I'll use myself. I'm 54. Someone around my age start testing me to see if the signs are there, and they would be with the blood test identified, that I should be put on a treatment regimen to stop the disease before I get the symptoms.
Hello and welcome back to the Pharmaverse Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Petrak. And if you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, well, then you're in the right place, because we interview the brightest stars from all the corners of the pharma universe. And today's guest would certainly fit that description. Today, we're joined by Mike Banville, the CEO of OwlsPath, who's developing an innovative diagnostics tool and treatment monitoring for Alzheimer patients. And we're going to be discussing the future of Alzheimer therapies, leadership and career development advice, and a framework for driving a strategy. So now let's meet our guest, Mike Banville. Welcome to the Pharmaverse. So you've been the CEO of 4 companies, but this is your first diagnostics company. Why this company and why now?
Yeah, no, it's a great kind of contextual question. So why this company? So I have worked with the person that's the lead investor in the company and co-founder in the company named Jerry Stead. So he said, Mike, I've got this really impactful and exciting business that I'd love for you to come in and help us enable the scaling of. It's called OwlsPath. And once he told me about the mission of OwlsPath, which is really about empowering early, accurate, and accessible diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease with a breakthrough technology that we'll talk about, I was sold pretty quickly. And the mission of this particular business and what we could do with it in terms of the societal impact.
Yeah, the societal impact's huge because, like you said, it's sort of like cancer. Like everybody has had it touch their lives in some way or another. In fact, we had a family member pass away over the weekend because of Alzheimer's. My wife is packing right now to go. I mean, so it touches people for sure. And it sure seems like early detection in Alzheimer's is critical. What advances is the industry making in that regard?
Yeah, and that's kind of the sorry, talk a little bit about kind of what's driving the reason for even thinking about a blood test here in the backdrop there, because I think that's the there's a real set of drivers behind this as to why now should we be thinking about this. In one regard, we now have, and many people may not know this, but we now have FDA cleared therapeutics on the market that can be administered to individuals with that are deemed to have mild cognitive impairment. So, we estimates are somewhere around 12 million people in the U.S. alone could have that, and many of those are undiagnosed. So having a blood test to be able to diagnose that larger population is obviously could be massively impactful just there. And then the second part is that there is real meaningful progress in developing therapeutics, drugs that can be administered to patients that have the biology is there that they're going to get the disease, but they have no symptoms. So that early diagnosis is so critical, both to help people that are starting to have symptoms, cognitive issues, as early as possible, but also not too far in the future where you can test. I'll use myself. I'm 54. Someone around my age start testing me to see if the signs are there, and they would be with the blood test identified, that I should be put on a treatment regimen to stop the disease before I get the symptoms. So, I mean, that's what the early diagnosis is about. And the reason for why now is because there are treatments, there are ways to deal with this, and we got to get to people earlier to make that work.
What is the diagnostic testing for? Is it plaque? I mean, what makes the OwlsPath diagnostic tool special?
Yeah, so there's a particular biomarker that's emerged as the flagship with lots of research evidence behind it, not just our version, just in general, called p-tau 217. So it's p-tau 217. That's the biomarker. That is measuring the accumulation of amyloid plaque on the brain, which is the early indicator of Alzheimer's. The other piece of Alzheimer's are the presence of tau tangles. That's when the bad stuff really starts to happen in terms of the memory issues and then the deterioration of the brain over time. So it's identifying the amyloid plaque presence in the brain at an earlier stage before those other symptoms start coming in.
That makes sense. And I've heard you say in other interviews, democratizing access to blood tests. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? And how is AlzPath helping with that?
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned, the mission was around early, accurate, and accessible access to a blood test. So the accessible is a really important piece. We've talked about the early and accurate. That's table stakes. You have to be as accurate as other tests out there. So right now, a PET scan is one of the main ways that people get diagnosed today. Highly accurate. The blood test is equally accurate. Accessible is really the third key. So our model is set up, our business model for AlzPath is set up in that we want to work with everybody. So what does that mean? To get the blood test out to as many people as possible. That means working to get our tech, our capture antibody, which is a key ingredient in a blood test, get that embedded in all the leading diagnostic platforms that run blood tests around the world. So I'll give you just a few examples of companies that do that at large scale. Roche, these are all partners, so I can mention these names. Roche Diagnostics, Beckman Coulter, which is division of Danaher, and Siemens Healthineers. Those are examples of, those are very large multinational companies. And more often than not, if you're going into a lab or a hospital, what have you, a retail lab to get a blood test, it's likely going to be running on one of those companies' machines or a couple of other companies out there. It's a scale business, and those companies have thousands and thousands of blood test machines installed around the world. So we thought, how do we accelerate making the test accessible? It's working with those companies to license out our technology. They're developing out the test on their machines and then commercializing it out to their customer base, which are the big reference labs and hospital labs, et cetera, around the country. So that central tenet of our model is to get it through all the large installed base of blood test machines around the world through those companies.
I can see that. I mean, you go and get your yearly physical, you get a blood test, and they give you all these different things. You don't know what they all mean, but you're just looking to make sure everything's in the normal range, right?
Right, exactly. So you think of this as an added test down the road, certain age, this may very well be an added test in that panel that when you go for your annual physical, to your point.
I have a question, and I don't know if you know the answer to this per se, but I wonder, are insurance companies eager or willing to pay for something that's preventative? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's a very interesting, complicated question. It's especially here in the U.S. with the structure of our healthcare system. So the current status of this test, p-tau 217, for the initial use case that I mentioned of someone who's is expressing memory concerns and to assess them as mild cognitive impairment, MCI being the acronym. The pricing has been established for the test by CMS, right? That drives the Medicare pricing, which is the anchor for reimbursement. So pricing has been established for the test as of January this year. And then the coverage decision is the last critical decision in the process. That's in process now by Medicare. The private insurers will typically follow suit in some form after the Medicare decision is made. Mm-hmm. So that's part one. But part two, that I want to mention, get back to your question around people without symptoms, that it's a different pathway from a policy and regulatory standpoint to get a diagnostic approved and reimbursed to test someone with no symptoms. But we do that in other areas. Cologuard is a good example of colon cancer. Mammograms is another good example. So in the cancer world, we have these diagnostics that test people before there are any symptoms to catch it early. And it's an initial screener that then will result in other diagnostics being done, like a colonoscopy after the Cologuard test. So that's a process flow. But from a regulatory standpoint, it has to go through what's called the Prevention Task Force, which is a panel that, with a lot of rigor, that takes actually a long time to get approval of a diagnostic for pre-symptomatic use.
Yeah.
Or it requires legislation. And actually, right now, there is legislation in motion that was initiated by the Alzheimer's Association and others to pass legislation to use the blood test for screening asymptomatic patients. So that's in motion, but that is a more complex journey than the first piece that I mentioned. Probably more than you wanted to know, but that's
no. I mean, the people that are watching are all in pharma. They get it. They're probably having that same question, and it's not just related to Alzheimer's. I mean, there's heart disease. This PCSK9. There's different things that are leading indicators that there may be a disease later in life. Can we start treating it now? And it's just a cost benefit equation, right?
That's right. And that's the thing with a blood test, the cost is relatively low relative to the benefit of getting somebody early, right? This is not thousands of dollars to do this blood test, right? So that's one of the key aspects here. Is it also is affordable as a key attribute. I mentioned early, accurate, and accessible. Well, affordable would be the fourth word you put there. For the blood test. Not just ours, but this concept of a blood-based diagnostic as opposed to a PET scan. Spinal fluid tap is the other way. Those are invasive, very expensive, and the infrastructure is limited depending on where you are in the country or in the world to get to one of those. So,
well, we're all hoping that OwlsPath, continues to blaze the trail path forward there on this, and we hope to see that this is going to make a big impact on patients. And again, this touches everybody. But I also wanted to dive into some of your leadership experience because it's amazing. And just to get to know you a little bit better, you're a big cyclist, I hear. You even biked in my backyard here at the National Monument. What leadership lessons can be analogous to cycling?
Yeah, I think, and a big cyclist, I appreciate that. I'm a cyclist. I enjoy it. It's both for fitness and for, I'd say for mental health. It's great being just out there on the road, wherever you are, riding. So I think I do it for that, for sure. But in terms of the thinking about the analogies, I do think it is this idea that you've got to keep going, and keep pedaling. And I think of, you mentioned Colorado National Monument up in the western part of the state of Colorado. I think of some of the peaks I've climbed on my bike, and other parts like in Vale, which many people know and have been to. That pass is a very challenging pass to climb, and you literally, there are points where you just want to stop, get off the bike, and just say, "Yeah, I'm done." But that's not what you got to keep getting up the hill to get to the other side and to get to things better, especially when things feel like they're challenging or you feel like large obstacles in front of you. So yeah, keep pedaling. I think I think I can think of both personally and professionally where that's really rang true.
So I love that thought because I really needed to hear that right now. I'm going through a tough time in my business, and you're right. It's like I'm trying to go up Vale Pass, and every pedal is like my legs are burning and it's pushing me. And it's just, if I ever stop pedaling, then I'm really cooked.
Yeah. And I think it's that building in that grit, I guess that's the word I think of, right? That just, you got to keep pushing through. That doesn't mean blindly pushing through. You have to think, adapt, move, right? But you keep moving forward. I think that's really the idea. Not to do it blindly, but to do intentionally, continue to move forward, figure it out, and keep going. I think that's part of what people say, grit. That's really kind of what's embedded in that word.
I like it. And there's a quote that I have right here on my monitor, that life rewards action. But it's true. It's not just any action. It's
Yep.
strategic action, but, inaction, there's no reward for that in a lot of ways. So
Yep.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. And more about cycling, any career development lessons that we can pull from cycling?
Well, I think the adapting piece. I mean, careers. People think they can plan out a career neatly and it's going to go exactly as planned. Would I tell you I today would be running a business focus on Alzheimer's, blood tests and diagnostics? No, I couldn't have. 20 years ago, I could have been even close on guessing at that. So, I think you can make a career plan, but you have to understand those not decision points, but points there where it could send you down one direction or another, or it might be three or four different directions, and really think about uh, how you want to adapt and pivot based on that. So I think biking is like that as well. I mean, it's not a straight line. Sometimes you got to go right up the hill. Sometimes you got to go around, and you've got to adapt. But I think that adaptability, and then I think the other piece is also knowing, well, here's the destination I'm actually trying to get to. I got to get there. I want to
Mm-hmm.
get there. So having a sense of what that destination looks like, being overly specific, that's probably tough. Like I said, would I have thought I would be leading a business like this way back? No, but I did know where I wanted to ultimately go on a leadership journey in terms of my career. And there were some twists and turns and some pivots, but I didn't lose sight of that ultimate destination either.
I say I have a similar narrative that I talk to people about. I think it's Yogi Berra that says if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but if you do know where generally you want to go, and then there's a detour, well, then you can pivot, but still know where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
And when you know that destination and you're confronted with a decision, you know which one's on strategy and you won't get confused. Take
Yeah.
the wrong road.
Yeah. No, that's right. If you have a overall plan, you've got to be flexible. Maybe that's the way people are overly rigid with the strategy and the plan. Sometimes you miss the mark, right? Because you can't flex to what inevitably is going to be a change here and there or something you didn't anticipate. But yeah, I think it's kind of having that North Star, if you
Yeah.
will, right? That's always there, but
Hmm.
you've got to, there are twists and turns along the way for sure.
Yeah, there are. Write your life in pencil to some extent.
Absolutely. Yep.
Let's dive more into leadership because you've been leading people since the 90s. And so much has changed in 30 years with technology and
Mhm.
even the culture of how work is done. But what is the biggest change that you've seen in the impact way leaders lead today in those 30 years?
I think about what are the things also that stay the same as well, because I do think there's, we especially with the pandemic, we shifted into this virtual world, whether we liked it or not. I mean, I was a person who used to go to the office every day,
Oh, yeah.
um, but I think that drove a change in how do you build and manage a culture of a company, which is so central to making companies successful, is making the people successful and keeping them engaged, and aligning on your, not just your strategy, but your mission and the values that you're trying to set as a company. So um, the pandemic threw a big wrench in that. With the We all jumped onto Zoom and Teams and all the other platforms that we had, Google Meet. Um, so I do think that was a big change, and it went to one extreme where everybody was like, we don't need to be in an office. People are closing down office spaces. But I do think there's a balance in between there that we've learned that I think is really critical. I really do believe over the decades that in-person interaction is really critical and central to accelerate innovation and productivity of teams and to get really, especially complex things, work through together. So, but I do think there's a balance where that can be complemented with the virtual. We're a virtual team, so we don't have a physical office, but we get together with a team uh, regularly
Yep.
to sit down for a couple of days and really work through things in a room, have dinner together. There's also the social relationship component of it, and that really helps to recreate that fabric of a culture, which I think a lot of folks lost over the pandemic. So I just think that was such a significant shift when that all happened. and we all adapted quickly with this virtual world. But I think there's a balance that in some cases, folks have gotten back to, in other cases, they haven't. I think we've got to find that balance. So I see that as a really big change, I think. But my view is it's got to be a mix of those two things to drive a strong culture.
Yeah. Our company has a headquarters, but my particular team is all virtual. And so what we basically would spend in rent, we spend on getting the team together. We have a retreat. We have different things. We do social things, do some virtual happy hour stuff. You got to do that. And again, because culture is central. I agree.
Yep.
There's a story that you told me that I want our audience to hear because I think it's such career advice. It was the story with Scott Key, how you went to him and you articulated something. I'll let you tell the story, but I thought this was a great moment to capture.
Well, I think it's along what we're talking about the roadmap and the career, having that North Star. So, I mentioned Jerry's stat under the public company that Jerry ran at multiple points when I was there, called IHS. It got acquired by Standard & Poor's a few years ago. I was leading different types of teams and functions like marketing, product management, sales enablement, sales operations, those kind of functions. And I really wanted to run like a business. And that could be like a business within a big company, or it could be as a CEO of a company. And I met with the then CEO, Scott Key was his name. And I said, Scott, I want to go run one of these. We had a business unit structure, but different divisions of the company. So you had essentially like a CEO inside of a bigger company running a business. I said, I'd really like to do that. And he said, well, Mike, you've got to check the boxes. And I said, well, what does that mean? Checking the boxes. He said, well, you've got to be a operational leader, which is what a CEO or business unit type leader is. You've got to have enough of the functional and other related experiences to qualify for that. So you could have people management, you could have some work doing strategic planning, sales or sales management. He kind of went through a list of different areas, product management. And he said, look, let's get you. He says, I think you can get there. Let's make sure we're thinking about next roles for you that check other key boxes so that you become a real contender for the role. But I think it was that idea of checking the boxes. It doesn't matter whether it's a CEO role or pick a different role. As you think about a career path, it's not always an immediate step from where you are to that role. It's going to be some smaller steps in between to develop the experience and check those boxes to get you prepared and to be a real contender for said role. So I've carried that with me, and I use that with team members of the various business I've worked with to help them think about a career plan, because I think it's a really kind of nice, simple construct to use to plot it out.
I think so too. And that's why I'm glad you told the story. But there's another little area of that story that resonates with me is you had the courage to go to Scott and tell him, this is what I want. This is what I'm shooting for. Help me get there.
Yeah.
I think help me get there is a lot different than I deserve it.
Yeah, no, that's right.
So I think that's a big takeaway for people that are listening that are like, I want to go to this path. You got to let the person who can help you get there know you want to go there.
And I think, to my point around multiple steps along the way, you have to be prepared for the feedback that you're not there yet, but I think you can get there, which is what Scott said to me. Let's talk about what are the things you've got to do, skills development, experiences, et cetera, to be a credible candidate for where you want to get to. So I guess also, yes, saying, help me get there, also be open to the feedback and the fact that may not be instant gratification.
Like the words that leaders use stick with people. And that moment saying, you're not there yet, but I believe you can get there.
Yep.
That belief has stuck with you all this time. And I think a leader really has to be thinking about what messaging they're sending to someone who isn't there yet, but I believe you can get there. I think it's powerful.
Yeah. And also as a leader, you've got to be able to tell someone they're not going to get there. Because I've had conversations with people that are reaching, way beyond. And you've also got, that's a grounding conversation. You don't want to destroy someone in the process in terms of their confidence. That's not what it's about, but it's about grounding them on like, look, let's talk about where we really are and what's achievable and in what time frame. Because again, that instant gratification sometimes gets people a little bit over their skis a little bit, in terms of what can actually happen. So it's a fine line. You got to be careful because it's not about kind of destroying someone's confidence and their dreams, but you also have to have those grounding conversations too. And if that's what Scott had said, that would have been very difficult for me to hear, but that would have set me in a different direction, I think, because I believed him and I knew he would tell me what he thought, not what I wanted to hear as a senior leader.
Those are great leadership insights and advice. And I think there's a lot to take away from there. You're also known for your operational strategy along with your leadership prowess. And you were telling me about this 5-point framework for organizational strategy. I'm a sucker for frameworks. So can you walk us through those 5 points?
Yeah, well, it's a pretty simple framework. That's what I like about it. But the idea is, you set your strategy for the company. Many companies, big and small, fail on the translation of the strategy to clear execution in ways that are measurable, time-bound clearly, and clear ownership, where people feel like they can actually go execute on their piece and they see how it ties back to the strategy, progressing the strategy. So the 5-point plan is simply a framework to translate the strategy into specific initiatives, 5. The only rule is 5, can't be more, ideally not less, that essentially become mega projects and mega project plans, which have a clear lead owner and are built out in great detail. So one example, I'll give an example with our business. I mentioned, we talk about democratizing access. That's at the center of our business model. So one of our initiatives is going to be to sign up X number of new partners where we license our technology to them over a time frame. A second one might be around as we're moving into the clinical uses of our blood tests over the next year or so, educating, empowering clinicians to adopt, use, and administer the blood tests in practice. So, and then there's a whole project, tactics, timelines, et cetera, on each of those that the team can actually go do. We have stand-up calls every Monday with the team, and we go through the 5-point plan initiatives, talk about what's next, what got done, are there any areas we're struggling, do we need help, that kind of thing. So it just becomes a very concrete, tangible management tool to translate strategy and execution. And it's also great to work with your board of directors on, because it's something they clearly can put their finger on. They can see, okay, we're progressing here, we're not there. How do we help you as well? So it actually works really well in the boardroom too, as a tool.
That's great. That's really helpful. One last question. We have time for one. What advice would you give to a first-time leader that you wish you would have had when you were stepping into your first leadership role?
I would say make sure you're getting input and really listening to all stakeholders. Really that 360-degree thing. I think up and down the chain, internal, external. I think the more you spend, especially early on in a role, listening and learning and being a little bit humble that you don't know everything. I think you ramp up faster. You become effective more quickly, and 2, you win over a team, whatever team it is you're working with. If you really take the time to listen, understand, take that in, then you start engaging them to develop the plan, the next phase of plan, like using a 5-point plan or some other construct. So I think that listening and really engaging early without judging, maybe that's a way to put it, is really, I think, really critical. And I think back in my earlier leadership roles, I wish I'd done a bit more of that and had that advice in hand. Not that I didn't listen, but I would have taken more time with that step or set of steps, I think, if I look back on it.
I think that's a great point, because so many leaders want to jump in and fix the problem before they've heard everything about it. And they want to show you how much they know before they've listened and find out really all the details. So I think that's great advice for first-time leaders.
Yeah, you want to get in and, there are always, that idea of quick wins. I mean, that's a real thing, right? And that's valid. Like get in there and fix things quick that are obvious. And that helps morale too when you're going to do that. But engage the team, listen, and then get them to participate in building the next phase of plan. And great things happen because they just feel ownership, they feel engagement, and they feel like they're really part of the decision-making process.
What a powerful point to end on. We can follow Mike Banville on LinkedIn. You could also find more information about Al's Path at alzpath.bio. But Mike, that's all the time we have for today's show. But on behalf of everyone in the Pharmaverse, I want to thank you for these wonderful insights and sharing your leadership lessons with us.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Really appreciate the time.
Well, that ends another episode of the Pharmaverse Podcast. We have many great leaders lined up for you, so make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single career-enhancing insight. But for now, that's a wrap. See you next time on the Pharmaverse.